Okay, so today you're going to do some adding of rational numbers. So the reminders are at the top for you. So remember that if you're adding the same sign, you're just adding and keeping the sign. So like we talked about, we're adding two negatives, we're going to get a negative answer, or we're adding two positives, we're going to get a positive answer. And then we have some reminders about our different signs. Remember that when we have different signs, we're technically thinking about subtracting. And then we're always thinking about, okay, do I have more positives? I'm going to have a positive answer. Or do I have more negatives? So therefore, I'm going to have a negative answer. So let's put some reminders in about fractions. I like to say that you turn all mixed numbers into improper fractions if needed. Sometimes when I'm doing these, I can tell that leaving it as a mixed number is actually easier. And sometimes making it an improper fraction is also easier. Remember, with fractions, we have a really important skill we have to remember. We have to find common denominators. And then we're going to use those integer rules that we have been talking about in the last two lessons, which again are all right here in your reminders, or you could use your Amplify book if you like the rules that we wrote together better. Okay, so we're going to go through these computation problems, and you should not be using a calculator. I'm going to go through all 9 of these. You should be focusing on writing them down with me and showing your work and your answer. Remember, we're trying to keep our work so we can read it and we can go back to it and use it as a reference. Again, we're not using a calculator. So in the first two, I can see I have one positive and one negative. I can also see that I have uncommon denominators, and I know that I'm going to have to subtract here, and I need to put the bigger number on top. So I can change these into improper fractions. So I have 4 times 2 plus 1, so that gives me 9 over 2. And then I have 1 times 3 plus 2, which gives me 5 over 3. I know that 2 and 3 have a common denominator of 6. So kind of taking it back to some 6th grade math, 2 times 3 is 6, and 3 times 2 is 6. So then I have to make the other top part of the fraction by multiplying by the same factor. So that becomes 27, and this becomes 10. And remind you, we have this negative sign. So we know we're going to subtract these. So I get 17 over 6 from 27 minus 10. And then I'm going to put this back into a mixed number. 6 goes into 17 2 times, which is 12. 17 minus 12 is 5/6. And I have that negative I have to put on there because the 4 was bigger than the 1. Right, let's go to the next two. Again, I see that I have a larger negative value and I have a positive. So I am going to change these into my improper fractions again. 5 times 6 is 30, plus 5 is 35 over 6. 2 times 4 is 8, plus 1 is 9 over 4. Common denominators. 6 and 4 both go into multiple numbers, but 12 is the smallest. And because 12 is the smallest, I want to use that as my common denominator. 6 times 2 is 12. So I do 6 times 2 is 12. 35 times 2 is 70. And then 4 times 3 is 12. So 9 times 3 is 27. Again, I have to subtract. I have a number that's negative and a number that's positive. 70 minus 27 is 43. Keep the denominator 12. 12 goes into 43 3 times, which is 36, and I get 7/12. Don't forget your sign, negative, because that 5 is bigger than the 2. Now I see that I have no mixed numbers and I have 2 negatives. So I know that when I have 2 negatives, I'm going to put them together, but I still have uncommon denominators. So I'm going to write 7/15 because I know that 5 and 15, that 5 can go into 15 3 times. So 4 times 3 is 12. I'm going to keep this with 15ths. And now because they are the same sign, I'm going to add. So I have -7 and -12 gives me -19/15. This is improper, so I'm actually going to change it into a mixed number. -15 goes into 19 one time with 4 left over. All right, going to the second row. I'm actually going to go right down below that just because that one's also got 2 negatives, but this time I've got some mixed numbers to deal with. So I'm going to change them to impropers. So 4 times 4 is 16 plus 3 is 19, -19/4. 1 times 2 plus 1 is -3/2. And I need some common denominators. I can see that they both go into 4, which is great because I can leave this alone. I can multiply this by 2 to get 4. Now I have -6/4. Remember, I'm putting them together because they're both negative. So 19 and 6 gives me -25, keep the 4. And then I know that 4 goes into 25 6 times with 1 left over. So 6 1/4. Okay, I'm going to go left. In this next one, I can see I have 1 of each. So I know that 3 is bigger than 2. I also know that I can make them improper. So 3 times 8 is 24. And 24 plus 3 is 27. Keep the 8. And then 2 times 4 is 8 plus 1 is 9. 9/4. Don't forget that guy's negative. I'm going to use 8 as my common denominator because I know 4 can go into 8. So 27/8 can stay the same. 4 times 2 gives me 8ths there. So 9 times 2 is 18. And I can subtract 27 minus 18 and get 9/8. And I know that I had more positives, so we actually leave that a positive. So this is 1 1/8. Final answer. The next one on the left, we have common denominators. That's great. I am going to go ahead and I'm going to leave them as mixed numbers because I can already tell that my bigger number is 2 and it also has the bigger numerator. So what's going to happen there is when I set this problem up, I'm actually subtracting and I want that bigger number on top. And when I do that, keep in mind I've got this negative to deal with. I can take away 11 from 5 and get 6/12, and I can take away 2 from 1 and get 1 6/12. I know the negative was larger, so I'm going to keep it, but I'm also going to simplify my 6/12 to 1/2. Okay, fractions are done. Moving on to those decimals. Remember we talked about that we have to line up our decimals. So when we line up our decimals, I want to make sure I still put that bigger number on top if I have different signs. In the first example, I happen to have two of the same sign, so it doesn't really matter what I do because I know that I'm going to add them together. They're both negative. I am going to add them. I'm going to get a 2, an 8, a 3, and a 3, and I'm going to keep my negative sign, and I get negative 33.82. In the next example, I have one of each sign, so I definitely have to pay attention to what number goes up top. Has to be the bigger number regardless of sign. So 7.22, and I'm going to put the 3.49 on the bottom. I do have to do some borrowing here. So 12 minus 9 is 3. I have to borrow again. 11 minus 4 is 7. And then I have to go back and I have to say what one was bigger. Well, 7.22 is larger, so therefore I have to have a positive answer. Last one, again, opposite signs. I'm going to put the bigger one on top, which is 19.3. Smaller one on the bottom. Don't forget about your sign. Have to borrow. I get 8. Have to borrow again. 12 minus 6 is 6. 8 minus 4 is 4. And then I consider my sign is in the bigger number and it's negative. I keep my answer to be negative 4.68. All right, going to the next page, there are two application problems that I'm going to work through with you. So a deck from which a diver descended was 1 3/8 feet above sea level. We know above sea level means that it's positive. So I'm starting with a positive 1 3/8. The diver descends negative 12 3/4 feet from the deck into the sea. So he is going downward 12 3/4. And we're going to then consider that. Now this comes out to be subtraction, right? So if we do that, that's a negative 12 3/4. Okay, so I'm writing it as addition a problem. Now I need some common denominators, some improper fractions. So I'm going to go 1 times 8 plus 3 is 11/8. And then 12 times 4 is 48, plus 3 is 51 over 4. I personally like writing problems like this, not horizontal, so I'm going to kind of flip it over here. I'm going to put my 51/4 on top. Keep in mind it's negative, and my 11/8 on the bottom to make my common denominators eighths. So that stays the same. That goes times 2. 51 times 2 is 102. So now remember I have one of each sign. Don't forget this little negative there. So when I subtract, I get 91/8. It's a negative. 8 goes into 91 11 times. That's 88. So there's 3/8 left over. So the diver is at negative 11 3/8 feet. Now we're doing like a little combination here. We've got Greta losing 2 1/5 pounds. She gains 1.2. She loses 3/4. So we have a combination, and they do give us a total weight. So what I want to do is I'm going to work through putting my negatives and positives in. So if you're losing 2 1/5, gaining 1.2, remember we're writing this as addition, and then losing 3/4, I'm going to put that as a negative 3/4. I am going to actually choose to make these all into decimals. Okay, if you don't remember how to do that, I know that 1/5 goes into tenths, which is a decimal place value, by multiplying by 2. That's 2 tenths. So this is really negative 2 2/10 plus 1 2/10. And I know 3/4 is 0.75. Now I can kind of put my two negatives together because I know that I'm going to add those. So 2.2 plus 75 gives me negative 2.95. And then I can take my bigger number and my smaller number, remember the bigger number was negative, subtract them and get negative 1.75. I'm not done. We want to know how much does she weigh now. So if she weighs 135 and she loses 1.75, I do have to consider putting these two in and doing a bunch of borrowing. So I have to borrow from the 5 to make it a 4 to get that to be 10. But I also have to borrow from the 10 to make it a 9 to make this 10. Now I can subtract. 10 minus 5 is 5. 9 minus 7 is 2. 4 minus 1 is 3. I keep the 3. I keep the 1. She weighs 133.25. Final answer. Okay, so what you're going to do from here on out is you're going to, don't forget to go on to the next page, use my modeled problems to go through and to practice these 10 problems. After you get the practice done in your packet, there are these check for understandings. They are more problems I would like you to do on paper, and then you're going to go into Canvas and you're just going to simply enter your answers. Be careful entering them. It tells you exactly how to type in negatives, how to type in fractions, and how to type in decimals.